and I'll give them the floor. Mrs. Schaake.
Thank you so much, Chair, for this opportunity to share the experiences we had as a delegation from this subcommittee, which I think could not have come at a more crucial time. Of course, this Parliament has consistently spoken out about our concerns with regard to the rule of law, respect for human rights, etc., etc. And there has been plenty of reason over the last couple of years. And I think it was very clear during our visit that the Parliament stands out as conveying a different message, one of more concern and criticism than, for example, the European Commission and the Council, particularly after the so-called deal on migration was made. Our focus was therefore on broadly the rule of law and human rights, but also specifically on press freedom, the situation of refugees, and within the context of the situation of refugees, particularly that of women and children, because they are the majority of these refugees. And we also looked at the fallout of the fight between the terrorist group PKK and the Turkish troops, which has disproportionate impact on civilians. And we heard that approximately 500,000 of them are already internally displaced, which is perhaps a message that does not always come across here in the EU, but is certainly important. During our two-day visit, which was packed, reflecting our ambitions, we spoke with international organizations, people working with refugees, from UNICEF to UNHCR to the World Food Programme and Turkish organizations. We also spoke with NGOs from Turkey, focusing on human rights and refugees, as well as international NGOs that are working on the ground. We had the opportunity to speak with an academic who lost her job after signing a petition. We met with representatives of 3 Turkish ministries on the level of a deputy minister. We met with the Turkish Grand National Assembly's Human Rights Committee, so our equivalent, led by an AK party parliamentarian, and we met with the main political groups in the parliament, including, and this was quite remarkable, with the HDP, and the leader of the HDP on the day during which there was a debate in the Turkish parliament about lifting the immunity of parliamentarians. This has since taken place. A block vote on lifting the immunity of parliamentarians has led to a situation where 130 parliamentarians can see cases against them, and this includes 50 out of the 59 members of the HDP party, which I'm just reminding for colleagues represent mostly the Kurdish people in Turkey. And so this was a very critical moment in the parliamentary debate. It was also the week before the AK party Congress would elect a new leader, who is now the new Prime Minister of Turkey. Another key topic for us during the visit was press freedom, of course, of major concern for years, including on the internet. We met with journalists of 3 newspapers and had the opportunity to meet with Can Dündar, the journalist who was convicted to 5 years in prison. He's awaiting his appeal. He's convicted because he published a story that allegedly had leaks of state secrets. And he also faced an attack on his life on the day that this sentence was passed. So very crucial time again in Turkey. I'll just conclude with some main takeaways that I think we in the Parliament at this moment in time need to be very much aware of. Oh, we also met, I should add, with the Ombudsman, which kind of underlines the point that I'm about to make. In some cases, on paper, laws are in place. For example, the institution of the Ombudsman exists. But oftentimes, the letter of the law is not the same as the respect for the law. And we see a high level of arbitrary application of the law, political influencing of how the law is enforced. We see a lack of a separation of powers, a lack of independence of the judiciary, and in fact, I think, a lack of institutional functioning in the way they are intended according to European standards. And so I think this deserves more of our attention, that we don't only look on paper which institutions, checks and balances and safeguards are in place, but really we look at the practice, and that is what our visit contributed to. it is clear that press freedom and, in fact, polarization throughout society has led to extraordinary tensions between institutions, between people and institutions, and, in fact, I would feel safe to say that there is a climate of fear among a lot of people in the country. I think the discussion on the changes with regard to the anti-terror legislation are going to be extremely important from a human rights point of view, in the sense that changes in the anti-terror legislation in Turkey are part of the requirements agreed between the EU and Turkey in 2013. Both parties agreed, I want to underline, on a set of reforms that would be necessary to meet the requirements for visa liberalization. And the reason why this has now come up in a fast track, one could say, is because of the so-called deal on migration, of which visa liberalization is an element, and for which we still need to see the changes in the anti-terror legislation. Now, of course, a lot is at stake, and some people may argue that the deal needs to go through no matter what. But I just want to point out to colleagues that one of the key things we noticed during this visit is that precisely the anti-terror legislation is used to target critics and to use, let's say, more excessive allegations because national security is at stake, because anti-terror legislation is invoked. And so this is not only a relevant discussion for the violence in the southeast, which should be of great concern to all of us with regard to the situation in Turkey, with regard to potential new refugee flows, and with regard to the broader tensions in the Middle East, but also because the anti-terror legislation is used to stifle criticism at a time where I believe it would be better for people in Turkey if there would be a more vibrant, free and lively public debate to ensure that the political changes that are made are indeed supported by the population, and so that democracy means more than one man, one vote. I'll end there to be short, but if any colleagues are interested in more information, I'm sure my colleagues and I are happy to share, because it was certainly an impactful visit.
Muchísimas gracias, señora Schaake.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Schaake. Mr. Leeds.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to thank Mrs. Schaake for her great leadership on our group. We were 3 people, but we were very, I would say, in the conversations, very effective in order to really cover a lot of ground. And also thank you to the Secretariat for organizing this very intense trip. On one day we had, I think, 9 to 10 meetings, like on the roll. And so what has been said already, I don't want to repeat. What has been interesting, the dimension on this week was really remarkable. Looking at the situation, the media situation, looking at the visa liberalization, which was hanging in the air. It was also asked from many counterparts, but in particular, the meeting, and we don't talk about only one academia we have met, but there are 1,000 people who signed a paper that they would like to have peace on the southeast of Turkey. So that many academia people have been fired from their places, and this is just the start. So as this was mentioned already, we look into a situation not only on fear, but I would say this is becoming a step towards more than autocracy. I would go a step further towards a dictatorship or presidential dictatorship, step by step. If you don't watch out, that things develop very rapidly as they have been started. In particular, on their parliamentary parties, we have met several parties. The HDP was very much concerned, and things now come into place that out of 50 parliamentarians are under threat to be in law cases. We also talked to several people, and so the amount of law cases, even started by the president, is not comparable to other countries. So the president really taking a big stake in that. And so we have to be very supportive now, because there are many hundred, I would say 1,000 legal cases which now come up, not only on the academia, but also on others, like the media people, which was mentioned already. So Turkey should become one of our focus countries because of the importance we have together to solve the situation. We always mention that Turkey has done a big deal on helping the refugee situation, and I was very positive on our meeting where we had a meeting with UNICEF, World Food Programme, and UNHCR. They told us the NGO level is the lowest they have ever imagined. It's a higher level in African countries to spell out their projects on the ground. Turkey has very unlimited small portion of NGOs to contribute to the process. But as we learned, 43% of the refugees are children, and besides that, many or mostly women. So in that regard, when we come to terms to give other funds towards Turkey, we should look into the situation to support the international institutions and not the Turkish government. That should be in our clear intention if there's more money coming from the European perspective. After we met Mr. Dündar, who told us that he would like to have stronger meetings of other supporters, Merkel was going to be in Turkey, and even the German media asked me in order to support a meeting with Dündar and Merkel. She didn't do it, but the high intention we brought into the situation was very important. We met besides that the Hurriyet newspaper, which is not under threat to that perception yet, but it could come very soon, and so they're also in big fear. So we should look particularly, and this was mentioned, be clear and straightforward as the European Parliament to not any step behind the visa liberalization fulfillment of all 72 requirements. We should not, whatever deal is going to be made of the President or by Germany or whomever, should be very clear and forward on that. There could not be a deal on human rights. And besides that, I would like to highlight the situation that we have a delegation coming from the European Parliament in July. I'm not sure if any one of our committee is a part of that, but we should look into that, particularly even like taking, knowing that, the advantage to even maybe give some points to the people, to the parliamentarians who go, so that we have a close ear to what has been said or what is going to be brought over there. They are also intending to go to Southeast, and as this was mentioned, we are looking at hundreds of thousands of refugees, no one knows the exact number, extra refugees being now in the situation inside Turkey, which are not taken care of as they should be. Thank you so much, and thanks again for everyone who supported that trip.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leeds.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. I'd like to comment further on what the colleagues have said, then before we get on to the World Humanitarian Summit, though we will, of course, talk about that. We're in Istanbul for the WHS. We met various representatives of civil society, the media, women's organisations, etc. And I came back, to be honest, very worried, just as the colleagues have said, about the drift towards a very repressive regime in Turkey. This is absolutely clear. There's lots of figures and facts backing this up. It's true that Turkey is going through a difficult situation, a difficult time. There's an awful lot of challenges facing the country. There's a lot of danger faced by Turkey, but that's not an excuse for what's going on. And my impression now is that we have a very difficult balancing act to do in the Parliament. On the one hand, I don't think we should just forget about the people of Turkey, who have a clear desire to move closer to the European Union, but at the same time, we've got to keep a very close eye on the situation where there is a clear lack of freedom and the situation in some area, women, for example, and other groups, the situation is clearly getting worse. It's possible that this legislation won't go through before the summer, but there is an attempt to change the law which would put in a very clear distinction when it comes to social security benefits between married and unmarried women. The government has said it wants to support families. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not an excuse for neglecting women who have family-type duties, even if they're not formally married. And we spoke to some journalists. They told us about newspapers being closed down, journalists being arrested and charged. This is a daily occurrence. So Parliament, as I said, needs to keep a very close eye on this situation, which is very worrying from a democratic standpoint. And that's obviously takes nothing away to the praiseworthy work that Turkey is doing with refugees. You can be nice to refugees and repress your own people. No one said the two things are incompatible. So as far as I'm concerned, there's a great deal of concern about, as I said, the drift that we detected in our various journeys to Turkey. There's going to be an EP delegation, an official delegation, which will probably take place in July, and our standing rapporteur, Kati Piri, will be heading that up. She's familiar with the country and familiar with our human rights concerns, so we'll be able to talk to her about that. Now, I think that the representative of the Turkish embassy, Ayse User, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you, Chair, for letting us comment on DRA visit. The visit, as far as we know, covered a wide range of topics and created a good opportunity to meet with Turkish authorities and civil society representatives. As far as I know, you met different people from the different sectors, from governmental officials to NGO representatives. And we thought that it is good, and we believe that such visits provide very useful and very fruitful exchanges of views and frank and sincere discussions. And we also believe that these discussions are essential in our relations. And open and sincere dialogue and constructive approach should be the basis of relations. So I first would like to touch upon our migration issue. I think everybody is well aware of the fact that Turkey is the only one country in the world, when you look at the numbers, irregular migrants numbers, we are the only one country, who hosts, that number of migrants. And right now, the number is almost 3 million. And only 10% of the migrants live in the camps, but the rest dispersed in all around the country. And with the emergence of the migration crisis, our relations, Turkey and EU relations have been re-energized during the last year. And a new page has opened. We want to sustain this momentum, actually. And I'm sure you are very well aware of the fact that Turkey-EU deal of 18th of March is working very well. When we look at the figures about the irregular migrants crossing the Aegean, in February, the monthly median was 850. But when you look at the May average, it is around just 20. It was a huge success. Nobody is talking about the existential crisis of the EU anymore right now. I think I can proudly say that our mutual efforts are fruitful in this area, and we kept our promises. We are keeping our promises until now within the framework of our agreements. We have accepted 441 irregular migrants from Greece. Out of this number, only 18 are Syrians. Majority are Pakistani. Germany, Netherlands, Lithuania, Sweden, and Finland took 319 Syrians until now. And you know, as I mentioned, we are keeping our promises, and we are waiting for the EU to keep its promises according to our deal, which are visa liberalization and you know, financial support for the Syrians. I would like to underline here that that financial support is not going to Turkish government. So that support will go to the Syrian population in Turkey. And another promise of EU is opening of new chapters. For the visa liberalization, I would like to say that, yes, you are right. You know, 72 criteria should be satisfied, just like any other country. Turkey would fulfill them. As I'm sure, I think you know that Mr. Timmermans, first Vice President, went to Turkey last Friday and had negotiations with the Turkish officials. As far as I know, they have reached an understanding. I don't know the details, but you know, roughly speaking, they have an understanding. And the Council of Europe would help us in adopting our, you know, counterterrorism law in line with the EU regulations. And for Can Dündar case, I would like to say that the case is in front of the court. I think in this stage, at this stage, there's no other way now but relying on our legal system. And for counterterrorism, I would like to say a few words also. Turkey is in continuous struggle against terrorism for long years, and we are determined to eradicate it. I don't want to go into details now, but since, for example, I want to give an example. Since last October, around 550 Turkish officials lost their lives. The whole region is adversely affected. And I also would like to underline that Turkish government struggle is not against the Kurdish people in Turkey, but PKK terrorism. Thank you.
Sí, señor Henkel.
Thank you, Mr. Henkel.
Yeah, thank you for this information. I would like to first ask a few questions to those people who were in Turkey. I was really surprised that with no word you mentioned the effects of the increasing Islamization in Turkey, and as you rightfully pointed out, Chair, its effect on the women's rights in that country. So I just wonder, have you not looked at it, or have you not found it, or what is the reason why we didn't hear anything about this in your report? A second question, have you come across complaints about harassment of Christians in Turkey? The third question I have is, have you come across the fact, which has been reported in the media, that currently Turkey seems to let only these kind of refugees get into Europe who have a very low educational level, for what reason whatsoever? Then it was reported by the representative of the Turkish embassy here that the average number of refugees in May has come down to 20 and that this is regarded as success. Chancellor Merkel from Germany has used a different statistic. She has said that ever since this agreement came into place, and I cite her now, only 7 people drowned. Now, that is indeed much less than before. My question to you, has it occurred to you in the trip that maybe many, many more people drowned before because they followed Frau Merkel's invitation? That is just a question. And finally, I would like to encourage all of us to distinguish between the Turkish people and the AKP. I think that is more necessary than ever at this particular moment. I am myself a frequent visitor to Turkey. I know this country quite well. Like everybody else, you cannot help but love them and like them. But what is happening ever since Erdogan is in charge is indeed depressing. And I think in our communication and in our judgment, we should more than ever differentiate between the Turkish people and the AKP and the current government. And I would say those people who suffer most from Erdogan is not us. These are the Turks. Thank you.
No sé si la señora Schaake.
Ms. Schaake, Mr. Leeds.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the questions as well as for the comments by the representative from the embassy. Of course, and I think that has to be clear that in a few minutes conveying all the details of a 2-day visit is not possible, and doing everything that might be necessary in 2 days is also not possible. So that's a caveat we will have to live with. But I'll try to comment on a few specific points that were made. The first one is, of course, the fact that there is a deep appreciation for the role that we see Turkey playing with regard to the refugees and the need to work together. I think that was also clear from the report that this Parliament adopted across political parties, but which nevertheless said that decoupling agreements and cooperation on migration is key and should be viewed separately from discussions on accession, for example. Then colleague Henkel's question about Islamization. It is not a theme that surfaced in our conversations with interlocutors. I think that what is of great concern for the people that we talked with, and also my observations over the past 15 years or so, is that indeed, and you hinted to it as well, politics of increasing top-down control, concentration of power in lack of the well-functioning of democratic institutions to ensure that there is a separation of powers, checks and balances, and that the rule of law applies not only in the letter of the law but also in the practice of the law is a clear concern. And perhaps some believe that this top-down control is intensifying with justification on religious grounds. Perhaps others see it merely as power play. Both would be concerning, but I think the fact that there's increasing, let's say, authoritarianism was the line, the theme that came across in almost every conversation that we had. We spoke about the impact on minorities, which we understood to be broader than just ethnic or religious minorities, but also people with a different lifestyle or people with a different opinion. Basically, diversity of views is under threat in Turkey, and we did not hear specific fears from Christians or about Christians in Turkey. So that's important. We, of course, share concern about terrorism and should never be justified, but neither should the abuse of anti-terror laws. Additionally, one thing that might be important to say about refugees, because the news or the reports, let's say, that there was a deliberate selection of higher educated versus lower educated refugees came after our visit. But I think such comments are of such a serious nature that they merit further investigation. In any case, I am personally of the opinion that every agreement that is made about the well-being of people fleeing a terrible war should be scrutinized, and we need to play our part as a parliament. And the fact that there is such vagueness about what is actually agreed, and it seems to be merely a political handshake, leads to a lot of risk. On the one hand, there are high expectations on both sides of what the other is going to deliver, and we see this kind of accusations in the media every day. And on the other hand, it's very hard for each side to defend themselves by saying that they have lived up to whatever agreement, because nothing is set in stone. And I think the fact that we lack the details of the commitment is actually one of its weaknesses, and the fact that all elements of our relationship are now pretty much looped together in this EU-Turkey migration deal also risks creating a situation where if one element goes wrong, it pulls with it the entire relationship. And I'm afraid that that's what we're seeing in quite cynical comments being made back and forth. And I think the fact that refugees have become bargaining chips is a low point in EU history and in world history, to be honest. Last point on refugees is that we did hear concerns about the impact on the demographic makeup of certain areas where, for example, a minority population may live, and a high number of refugees of perhaps different religion or different background were deliberately placed. And again, these were comments we heard that I think merit more research. But basically that there was a demographic policy behind the spread of refugees. And I think that that's something we should look at in a Middle East and a region that is already quite fragile and sees too many ethnic tensions. Then the distinction between the population and the government. I hope it is clear to people that this parliament, which is itself very diverse in its voices, does not only look to the government as a representative of the country. In fact, civil society organizations and different people were core interlocutors for us, but perhaps we can also do our best to make sure that any relations between the EU and Turkey do not fall into the category of government-to-government contacts only, and I'm sure that this Parliament can play a key role. I share your heart for the country, and as a result your concern, and I hope that in this process of looking at what is happening, we can still remain avenues for communication, even though I think one of the very unfortunate consequences of the EU-Turkey deal on migration is that the most, let's say, European direction looking Turks or people in Turkey that look to Europe with most anticipation have become very disappointed, and perhaps likewise the people in Europe who have looked with greatest ambition to strengthen EU-Turkey relations and even to see Turkey acceding to the EU somewhere on the horizon have really become in the perspectives of that. And so the question is that without the strong base on both sides being committed and having faith in where this relation is going, that it can be values-based and that it can stand even difficult political currents, is a point that certainly came across during our meeting. So again, it's impossible to share everything. I would be able to talk for hours more, but I will spare your time as well. And just want to say that if colleagues are interested before the next trip or just in the context of preparing their vote on visa liberalization in this House, feel free to contact us. I'm sure Arne agrees and maybe he has some points to add. But it certainly is a crucial time, and I hope that, that we can play our role and keep the focus on the very principles that should, in my humble opinion, underpin our relationship.